The Great Midget by Brendan Bozeman. Randy did not like visiting his old friend. He watched the mansion grow bigger and vaster before his eyes as the Rolls-Royce took him up the hill. The car rolled to a serene stop, and an English gentleman got out to open the door for him. Randy would rather have gotten out himself, but it caused Nigel, the driver, embarrassment, and Marky was standing outside the grand portal waiting for them. Franklin, the butler, retrieved the bags from the trunk as Randy walked up and extended his hand to his dour friend. "Hi, Marky." "You're the only one who can call me Marky," he said with a slight smile. "To everyone else, it's Marcus." His name was Mark. This moniker was a new development in the steadily increasing megalomania of the master of the house. They were both only 16, but Randy was far taller. He had grown on the normal schedule of a healthy adolescent and was filling out the lanky, hobbledehoy build that had embarrassed him since he was 13. Marky's problem had been different. He was a boy who simply wouldn't grow. The doctors were clear that he would grow eventually, but he was well behind his peers physically, and at the time appeared no older than 10. It was one of the reasons Marky had a large bronze bust of Johannes Brahms beside his seat at the head of his dining table. Brahms was also well behind his peers, high-voiced and overlooked as he developed his masterful skills at the piano. At least he was overlooked until someone heard him play. That was something else that bothered Marky. He did not have any outstanding talents. He had only the story of having picked the largest lottery ticket in U.S. history. His parents had bought it, of course, and the entire estate technically belonged to them, but he had picked the numbers, so they thought it was only right that they let him have choices over how the money was spent. He spared no expense on himself from the start, but as it became clear that he wasn't going to grow for a long time, and that his parents were not going to allow growth hormones, his spending became ever more lavish and his projects more grandiose. Until then, Randy and Marky had been good friends. They lived next door to each other, attended the same school, and played the same sport. But with the money, Marky became more and more separated from his old friends. He had continued to invite them over from time to time, but it was not the same to visit his estate and be outclassed in every material way. The same way adults slip into different worlds as they achieve different levels of financial success, so did Marky and his friends drift apart. He found himself rubbing shoulders with celebrities they had known only from YouTube and traveling from city to city, especially LA, where he would attend parties and do interviews on TV. And just as adults can find little pleasure in newfound wealth, Marky had likewise come to value his possessions at little. Intensifying this feeling was the realization that the celebrities he met were only using him as a curiosity. His only value to them was as the little rich munchkin sidekick. To make matters worse, his friends, especially Randy, whom he had begun to envy, grew, quote, like weeds, as they say, and even started to have what they considered girlfriends. So Marky had gotten to be a sullen boy, and even his parents found that they sometimes wanted to stay away at the old house in retreats that could extend for several days. They loved him, of course, but it was getting harder to like him, and they wanted to give him space. Also, they began to feel less and less welcome over time. Marky sometimes took breakfast in the upstairs kitchen, for example, or disappeared to a restaurant at night without inviting them. Moreover, They never felt very comfortable in the mansion. Just getting up to use the bathroom or to go to the refrigerator was, by his father's reckoning, 50 or 60 yards of walking. Would he walk to the end of the street to have a spoonful of ice cream from the fridge? He would become very aggravated if he got himself something to eat while he was watching TV and then found he had forgotten a fork all the way back in the kitchen. In such cases, Marky would remind him that there were servants for all that, but neither he nor his wife could get used to the idea of having others run around for them. It felt like they were never alone and never at home. "We just aren't made to be rich," Marky's father would say. The times Randy saw Marky, he felt he was fulfilling an obligation. He never had fun. Their conversation was forced, and trying to relax like in the good old days never felt natural, and usually ended up with watching a movie in the theater and playing video games on the same huge screen, something that was impressive at first, but which lost its luster. He could do the same thing, if on a smaller scale, without the drive to Marky's mansion. He would convince Marky to throw big parties. Mind you, he threw several birthday parties his first year there, and at first it was an amazing feeling to impress everyone with all the glitz and music and games, but Marky never truly enjoyed them. He felt like an oddity and had the feeling people talked about him behind his back. He came to prefer conversing with people one at a time in a quiet setting, which allowed him to have his full say on equal terms. So he would invite individual friends over. Those dates started to fall through. He gave invitations less and less frequently, and now he never had anyone over but Randy. Randy wasn't sure why he was still invited, but he would have felt bad saying no. Just in the few steps up to meet Marky, Randy pondered all these things and more, such as that he had homework to do, and it did not bode well for a pleasant overnight stay. This was the first time he had seen Marky in months, and this time it felt like a chore only. Randy was led to his chambers by Franklin, and he changed into a bathing suit. His window had a slide going directly to the pool, which he took head first, crashing into the lagoon-shaped pool below. Marky was already there, and they took the gondola up several times for more runs. Franklin brought them out a snack, and they sat by the pool. Marky was quiet, and Randy took a long time to find anything to say. "Marky, why don't you have another party sometime? It would be cool. I mean, with all this space and everything. People used to like them. I don't want people to think they can take advantage of me." This was an objection Randy hadn't heard before, but he parried. "Have people over for a birthday party. You know, your real birthday. Then they'll have to give you something, too. And it's normal to have a birthday party." Marky spat a little on the deck. "I'm not having a birthday party. That would be embarrassing. Everybody would talk about how small I am for 16. 16, and I still look like this." "Well, then just have a party for like the 4th of July. Have some fireworks. You could even set up some kind of pavilion on that side of the pool." Marky was intrigued. They could have a big chair way up high. They tossed ideas back and forth about entertainment, a DJ, everything for a massive party. And I would invite everyone except Jay Snoozy. "Why not Jay?" "Because that little bastard made fun of me earlier. That's when I was still pretty much everyone else's size. But he noticed I wasn't keeping up and called me a twerp." "I don't know. Well, forget it. It's your party and you can have anyone you want." "Right. By the way, you'll like this. Get dressed and meet me here in 5 minutes." Randy was back down there soon, and Marky led him across the expansive backyard to a newly constructed barn-type structure. "What is this?" "Just sit down. Mr. Dooley has to come. It's a regulation. Just wait." In a few minutes, a car pulled up to the other side of the barn. Doors were unlocked, and someone came to the front door. Marky motioned for Randy to go in. "Whoa," he said. It was a gun range. Mr. Dooley helped them with their gear and showed Randy the basics. They shot 22 rifles and some pistols. "Next time, he'll let you shoot something bigger," said Marky. "I tried a shotgun, and, yeah, I learned my limitations. My shoulder was bruised for a week." After that, they went to the basketball court and shot around. "How's homeschool going?" asked Randy. "It's cool. It's mostly with Mr. Price. He insists I call him by his last name, which suits me fine. We basically just talk about whatever. It's way better than school." "I bet." Randy did not proffer any information about regular high school. Marky continued, "You'd like him. Imagine that. A teacher you actually like." "They aren't all bad." "Maybe not, but still. You don't have to stick to a set schedule, and there's no wasted time with stupid kids in the back who don't get anything." "Don't forget those stupid kids slow things down. There's this one girl in algebra. As soon as she puts her hand up, me and Kyle just kick back for the rest of the class because nothing, and I mean nothing, is going to be taught after that." "That sounds good. Mr. Price basically just gets to the point of things. He has a lot of good stories about history, and we don't really have classes. Everything's all mixed in. We just cut off when we're done, no bullshit. That's usually by noon, so I have lunch, and that's it. I go to the country club, and Pierre's there for golf." "Pierre Villumier? That's sick. I didn't know he taught golf." "Just for me." "Wow, you got to bring me along sometime. I'll skip afternoon class." "Cool. Just tell Nigel where to meet you next Wednesday." "Okay, I'd say behind the gym, but can you tell him to bring, another car? I think it would kind of stick out to have a Rolls Royce waiting out back by the dumpster." Marky laughed with a hint of derisiveness. "Nah, prob." When they went back out to the pool, they were summoned for dinner by Franklin, who came out onto the balcony and blew a bugle. "Jesus, man, you're nuts," said Randy. Inside, they sat at a giant table designed for at least 30. Each was at one end, and they had to raise their voices to talk. A waiter stood next to each, to the right and slightly to the back so he wouldn't be seen directly. They were practically solemn in their professional demeanor and had an uncanny ability to anticipate their wishes. "This is my Montgomery Burns table," Marky said. "And this, if you don't know him, is Jojo." He waved his hand toward the bust of Johannes Brahms that loomed in the corner. "Hi, Jojo." "Now for my other friend." Marky took a deep breath and shouted, "Hey, Gorgie, let's go." From a large anteroom, a midget came dancing into the room singing, "Santa Claus is coming to town." He ran around the table with bells in his hands and did various acrobatics. Then he told a few jokes and got on his hands and knees so Marky would have a place to put his courteously shoeless feet. Randy was aghast. "See, Price was telling me about Tycho Brahe. You know, the astronomer." "No, but go ahead." "Well, he was a genius astronomer, and like all geniuses, he had a few eccentricities. One of them was to hire a dwarf to put his feet on. When I heard that," he gestured toward Gorgie. Randy couldn't believe what he was seeing. All the respect and affection he had been regaining for his friend evaporated. How could he be so strange? But at the same time, after recovering from the initial shock, He couldn't help but recognize that it was, well, pretty damn funny. Gorgie made a joke out of it. "Bet you didn't know I had a masseuse, did you?" he said, looking at Randy. "That's right, boss. A little higher. That's a spot." He didn't stay on all fours for long. He got up and did a few acts during the meal. Between dinner and dessert, he did several jaw-dropping magic tricks that seemed flatly impossible. He reached into his pocket and produced Marky's cell phone. He gave it back to Marky, but then, after telling a few jokes, told Randy all the way down the table to check his pocket, where, of course, he found Marky's phone. They had their dessert, and when they were finished, Gorgie did some stand-up comedy. Randy liked him. He really seemed like a good guy. Still, he couldn't help but feel bad for him, especially as he made his exit doing cartwheels and singing Kesha's ancient "Your Love Is My Drug." Marky smiled as Randy shook his head in amazement. "You won't believe this, but it's a different act every time." "Marky, I think you're losing your mind in this big cavern. What will you have next? A death laser?" "Working on it." They rounded out the evening with a movie in the theater, and Randy went to his room and watched TV. It had certainly been an interesting day. He was glad Marky would have that party, and it seemed he was coming back out of his shell. Maybe he would grow again soon and generally come back to his senses. Still, having all the servants around and that dwarf, that couldn't be good. He smelled something pungent and, curious, got up and tried to follow the scent. It was coming from one end of the long hall where he was. He passed guest room after guest room, the smell getting stronger and stronger until he recognized it as marijuana. He'd never smoked it, but he knew the smell. "Oh, Marky, don't tell me you're getting high now. That's just too weird for someone who looks like he's 10, he muttered. It was coming from the balcony around a bend in the hall, and when he got there, he could see Gorgie smoking with Franklin. Franklin got up immediately and left, but Gorgie stayed put. "Have a seat," he said. Randy sat down. "I'm Randy." "Actually, I knew that. You get a briefing before a performance. Here, have a drag." "No, thanks. I don't smoke." "Suit yourself. Nice night, isn't it?" "Yeah." Randy paused for a long time, then said, "Do you go home?" "I live in California. Mr. Spencer hired me to be here for 3 months. Then we'll see." "Mr. Spencer?" "Technically the Mr. Spencer, but you know who calls the shots around here." Randy said, "Do you like this?" "What do you mean? It's my job." "But isn't it kind of demeaning?" "Again, what do you mean? I spent years learning this." "My name's actually, well, yeah, Gorgie, but having someone use you as a footstool? My name's actually Steven. Gorgie is the one thing I learned in high school. It's biology. I thought it was a cool name. Anyway, no, it's not demeaning. It's a job. I work like an hour a day, if that, get $1,000 a day guaranteed, plus expenses, and otherwise, I do whatever I want. Who's getting demeaned? Me or some guy sitting in a cubicle all day?" "I see." Jesus, these teachers these days. Did they teach you to feel sorry for midgets? Ask them how sorry I feel for them spending the whole year earning half my pay for this gig alone. Answer, I don't. Teachers are just society's biggest losers who hope they can find someone to feel sorry for so they can feel like they're one notch up from somebody else. Nope, not for me. I don't know about you, but I hated school. I can see that. I guess I get along okay. I'm sort of in the middle. That's just what they want. Pasty pablum brains like you who don't get in the way. Randy was feeling very small. Nah, I'm just joking with you. They are losers, but I was just joshing. You came out here thinking you felt sorry for the midget, and suddenly you feel sorry for yourself. No, I wasn't. And anyway, aren't I supposed to say little person? Midget's fine. Everything I said is true except you being just pablum. I mean, you're not pablum. Not until you're 18. Randy nodded. Being in the middle is kind of ideal. That's what the Greeks would say. Don't strive for the extremes. That ends badly. Just be sort of average if you want to be happy. Bet your teachers never told you that, did they? Randy shook his head. Where I am is pretty much the ideal middle. I bet you had no idea who I was until tonight. Not really. Of course not. I'm not famous. But I'm well enough to be able to roll right on through life without a care in the world, easy as can be. Who could want more than that? But I didn't mean to put you down. I was just having fun. You sure you don't want to have a drag? I've never done it before. Gorgie, or Stephen, held it out to him. Well, maybe one. Randy imitated how Stephen did it and ended up in a coughing fit. Stephen laughed heartily. After that, they had a normal conversation. Randy didn't really remember it later, but they mostly talked about movies. It was 1:30 a.m. before he realized the time. His eyelids were sagging and he went to bed, leaving Stephen to contemplate the moon. I'm thinking of putting in a paddock, half-shouted Marky over breakfast. A paddock? You know, for horses. Randy shrugged. What about that party? When do you want to do it? Marky looked at his plate and continued eating. Why the change of heart? Yesterday you were psyched. I never made any promises. Come on, Marky, it'll be cool. No one's going to think bad about you. They'll just be here for the fun and they'll try to milk me for all I'm worth. Marky, put me in charge of that. I'll talk to Brian. You remember Brian. His brother is a bouncer and has a lot of bouncer friends. We'll just invite cool kids, and if anyone starts being disrespectful, they're gone. And that person never comes to another party. Who said anything about another party? Your choice, Marky. Totally your choice. I was just thinking out loud. And as for Jay, we'll invite everyone in the class but a few choice assholes, including Jay. We'll let that sink in. Then we'll say we're going to add a few people to the list. That will get his hopes up. But what we'll do is expand the list to all the freshmen, sophomores, and juniors and make sure every loser, geek, dork, and previously disinvited asshole comes, except Jay. Marky glared at him, then smirked. Let's do it. The party was fantastic beyond belief. Amusement park rides were set up in the yard. There was a band. Food was everywhere. The place was fully staffed, even with lifeguards. And Marky had gotten a golden throne made that he put on the balcony overlooking the pool, with red carpeted stairs going up to it from the pool deck. Randy thought that part was a little much, but withheld comment. He was pleased to see Marky so happy as he presided over the party, and he felt happy for Marky when he opened the balcony up to the guests. They took selfies, but also had a photographer there for pictures. And most of them wanted pictures with Marky. The other kids were nice to Marky and didn't make him feel different. Randy observed this from another balcony where he was keeping an eye on the party. He reconned with the bouncers by walkie-talkie, and a couple of times it seemed to him that a kid was getting a little out of line or might be starting to make Marky feel out of place. The walkie-talkie would go up to his face, and bouncers would quietly escort the violator to the front door, where they would be picked up. In these cases, the parents would be summoned by phone and delivered their children with a spare explanation. They did not raise a fuss. not with several somber-looking bouncers standing by. There were some parents which the school had insisted be there as chaperones, even though it was off campus, but they were confined to the guest house for their own party. It was an awkward gathering, and many had left altogether to wait for their children to call. An elite corps of guests were invited to spend the night. They got to have dinner at the big table and be entertained by Gorgie, after which they saw a movie and got to stay in a guest bedroom. This part had been a sticking point for some parents, and Marky had agreed to have a few chaperones make sure everything was gentlemanly and ladylike. As it was, the party stayed in the main living room well into the night and even the morning. Some few parents needed a good deal of convincing from their puffy-eyed, groggy children that they weren't hung over when they were picked up. From that point, Randy spent more time at the mansion and brought a few others along for the fun. Marky seemed to loosen up and trust his newfound old friends. Most of them treated Marky with true respect. The ones who didn't would stop getting invitations. And eventually, by the end of the year, there was a core of about 25 who really got along and had the right kind of fun at the mansion. Parties continued, which included more than the core guests, but bad behavior was not tolerated, and being evicted amounted to a lifetime ban. Over the summer, Randy practically became a second resident. By September, he was petitioning his parents to allow Mr. Price to tutor him. Little by little, they were convinced. First authorizing his help as an after-school tutor, then, after many pleas by Randy, allowing Mr. Price to take over in a homeschooling arrangement. They based their decision not just on Randy's enthusiasm, but on his success as a student. He got A's across the board in the fall. They, in turn, convinced the school to allow it full-time. As the winter wore into spring, they noticed he was getting a truly world-class education far in advance of his peers at the high school. In their eyes, it was a stroke of good luck that had happened for his junior year, and since he was passing AP tests with flying colors, his college prospects looked very good. They didn't object as Randy became more of an occasional guest in his own home. The following summer, Randy developed his life plan. Mr. Price had been teaching him some of the basics of economics, and he began to worry that Marky was squandering his fortune. Randy's ears had started perking up whenever he heard a story of someone losing a fortune, from investors to kings and queens, to inventors, to lottery winners, just like Marky. The size of a fortune made no difference as to whether someone could waste it. He didn't want to see Marky lose it all, and not just because he was benefiting too. He was also aware that many rich people, especially nouveau riche, became insufferable assholes, and so far Marky was avoiding that. Sure, he was a little big-headed sometimes, but overall, he was a pretty nice person these days. He decided to get, of all things, investing for dummies so he could learn how making money really worked. He studied the book for a couple of weeks beside the pool and then realized it wasn't that hard to hold on to wealth and make it grow as long as you weren't an idiot. He even looked at a lot of other books and found there wasn't much more to be learned from them. "Marky," he said, when they were being served lunch by the pool, "are you planning for the future with your money?" "Obviously. My parents got a financial advisor." "What does he do with the money?" "How should I know?" "I'd like to see his books." This would be prying for any normal person, but with Randy, Marky took no offense at all and said he'd talk to him. Randy got his interview with the man, Mr. Brooks. He didn't understand much of what he said, nor did he understand the spreadsheets he was shown. "I don't trust that guy," he said to Marky later. "Why not?" "I don't understand what he's saying. I think he's trying to snow me." He didn't know I read that book, and he was just trying to bury me with jargon. Are you sure? I get all A's, don't I? Sure, I'm sure. He thinks I'm an innocent little kid and can't understand. But it's not that complicated. His words weren't sophisticated. They were just supposed to sound sophisticated. I think he's taking advantage of you. Really? Yes. I can't prove it without knowing something about accounting, though. I know I don't get accounting. So, what do you say you get a certified public accountant to teach me what's what? And have Mr. Price there, too. It was no sooner said than done, and Randy spent a couple of weeks with a CPA learning the basics. With Mr. Price, he was able to combine what he learned with a study of algebra and calculus to get a solid picture of the ins and outs of investing, although that level of math wasn't really necessary. He requested a new interview with Mr. Brooks. It did not go well. Marky, that bastard is ripping you off. What? He's ripping you off. I played dumb, like I didn't get what he meant, but believe me, he's got to go. He bullshitted me for an entire hour and a half. Like serious, doesn't even make sense to itself bullshit. Bottom line, he's ripping you. His investments suck. He's killing you with fees, and he's taking extra fees just for himself that actually look kinda illegal. Marky, you've got to get rid of him and put me in charge. I know exactly what to do. You just have to tell your attorney to sign whatever documents, that's all. Marky wanted more of an explanation than that. He got it. Randy put it in very simple terms, what he should be doing with his money. And though Marky didn't fully understand it, he believed it. Okay, Marky, awesome. Get another advisor if you want and tell him to look over my shoulder just so there is no question I'm not screwing you. But I promise you I will do 1,000 times better of a job. All right. I won't get another advisor, though. Sounds like that's the problem already. I'll tell my parents to tell my lawyer tomorrow. Randy turned to go get his bathing suit on and go down the chute, but he suddenly turned back. Come here, Marky. Marky walked to him, and Randy grabbed his shirt and pulled him in close. Their noses weren't at the same height, but they were a lot closer than usual. Holy shit, Marky, you've grown. Randy had one of the guest bedrooms converted into an office. He rearranged all of Marky's finances over the next few weeks. It's just common sense, Marky, he said. As long as you know what you're doing. All I have to do now is keep kind of an eye on things, and you'll be able to spend a solid $50 million a year without even noticing. How the hell will I spend that much? You'll find a way. But you might be surprised to know you haven't gone through more than $8 million for each year for the last 2 years. That means you can keep pumping that back into the engine. So, thumbs up to some thrifty spending. Maybe I should be spending more. Maybe I should get another compound or something. You've got plenty of time to decide on that. Might as well just let all this build up for a while. What for? I don't know, but you can never have enough money. You never know what might happen. I could see this getting up to $200 billion by the time you're old. So you don't think I should up the spending? It's your money, Marky. I just don't want to see you flush it all down the toilet. We'll talk more about that balance later. Right now, you're perfect. But you could build some more mansions. Get a few private islands. Maybe start a private army. As long as it's not all at once. Sounds like a lot of traveling around. True, and it opens you up for people to start ripping you again. Maybe just one ski chalet. Go for it. And maybe one island. Or one mansion on every continent. Or maybe a car collection like Jay Leno. I could always use a bunker in case there's a nuclear war. Randy shrugged. It's your money. Marky lost initiative for his new spending spree. The The fact was, for a near billionaire, he was something of a homebody. His extra spending went into the compound. He built a house for Gorgie, who had become a fixture at Marky's, and who knew a lot of other talent that could come and perform at parties and dinners. Marky didn't want names that were too big, and Gorgie knew a lot of people who fit the bill. A number of them had ties to Las Vegas, where Gorgie officially lived. They even had Carrot Top come once. Gradually, he was asked to do less and less work. He acted as a kind of advisor to the boys. They would go together or one at a time to his side porch when he had something to talk over with him. And if he was so disposed, he would come out after a while with a blunt and talk. Both respected his privacy, and if he didn't come out, they would leave. Gorgie brought in a succession of girlfriends, and he was once visited by a daughter who towered over him. Unfortunately, she died of a drug overdose after that visit, and Gorgie became even more reclusive. But he still could perform as if nothing was bothering him. The one rule Gorgie refused to break was that he would never get the boys hard drugs. They had never asked. He had just one day said, "It would be too cliché if you two became druggies. That story is too boring for you." Randy got a girlfriend, and then another and another. They lasted about 3 months on average. He had always wanted to get married and have kids, but he grew suspicious of girls after his very first girlfriend had laid out a life plan for both of them that included a little of what he wanted and a whole lot of what she wanted, particularly luxuries. He felt like a bit player in her life story and started to pull back from her. From then on, he decided he would have to be very careful with women. He didn't want to get into a divorce. When he mentioned this to Marky's CPA, the same one who had trained Randy, he was congratulated on his good fiscal sense. "Gold diggers can bring down a castle as effectively as sappers," he said. Marky kept growing, and by senior year, he looked like he was 14. Randy was proud of Marky. He would sometimes think back on the arrogant, angry, and lonely boy who had greeted him on the steps just a few years ago, and he believed that after a detour, he'd gotten back on track as the kind of kid he was before winning the lottery. He thought that was a bigger victory than not going broke. He maintained a close eye on who came to the compound. Anyone who started to tamper with Marky's development would have a conversation with him and Brian, who remained head bouncer. They would be told they were not expected back and were never given a reason. By graduation day, Randy had decided he would not be attending college. He had gotten into one of the elites, but he decided there was no point in going. He'd already won that battle. As Marky's money manager, he already had a lucrative job anyway. On top of that, Marky offered to build him a house on the other side of the broad field behind the mansion, something big enough for his future family, and that he could design himself. Marky had only one stipulation. It started as a joke. "You know, if you don't go to university," he said, "you won't have the well-rounded education of the sort of gentleman I require." "Then why aren't you going to college?" said Randy. "I'll ask you to limit your questions to the affair at hand," said Marky, "and I'd like my money manager to be worldly. Someone who can see the big picture, the forest for the trees." "I can learn that whenever I want." "Then how about now?" "All right, what do you want me to do?" "I'll take a book from the library and you have to read it." "Easy, I'm sure Praise can help." "Oh, no. I want someone with independence. Get up and go." "Fine. Which book?" You know I don't know what's in the library. It came with the house. I'll pick something at random. They started toward the library. Suddenly Marky stopped. "And Price will test you on it." "Okay," said Randy, defiantly. They went to the library, and Marky wandered around the room for a while and picked out something big. "Ah, yes, Moby Dick." Randy wasn't happy, but refused to show it. "No problem." He took the book away, and nothing was said about it for 8 weeks. Then Randy threw the book on Marky's lap as he was dozing at the pool. "I loved it, and I'm ready," he said, icily. They called Price, and Price tested him, and he passed. Marky went to the refrigerator and got 2 Cokes, one for Randy. "Congratulations. Now read the collected works of William Shakespeare." "No. Hard no," said Randy. "You had your chance to be a tyrant, and that's it." Marky laughed and sat back down on his chaise longue. "Sorry to be like that. I'd forgotten all about the book. I gave it to you weeks ago." Randy lay back in his own chaise. "That's all right, Marky. An eccentric billionaire is supposed to do shit like that." Within a few years, Marky was full grown at last. Just like Johannes Brahms, he grew a giant beard, and he took to wearing tattered clothing the way Brahms did. That got him to thinking that he wanted to have a hermit on the property. "I saw on the internet that way back, people had hermits on their estates," he said to Randy. "Guests would walk through the gardens, and the hermit would come out and say some crazy things to them. That sounds cool." Said Randy, pondering where a hermit's hovel could go. "But one other thing. They also built old castles that look like ruins. I was thinking it would be cool if we had a whole area, like a park, where there was an old castle ruin and a place where the hermit lived. Maybe on a little island." "I think you'd have to buy the Blakely place," said Randy. The Blakely place was occupied by an old woman who lived alone with several full-time nurses. "You're probably right. Isn't that lady getting old?" "I'll talk to the sons." It was hard to make an agreement with the Blakeleys. But as luck would have it, Mrs. Blakely finally passed away peacefully a few weeks later, and the family was agreeable to selling. The park and ruins were made. Marky was going to tear down the Blakely mansion, but he decided to have it damaged instead, and leave it as an, quote, abandoned manor. He thought it would be great for Halloween. "Whatever you want," said Randy. "You're still within a 10-year budget." All was smooth sailing, seemingly, but for one problem that taught Marky and Randy a lesson they would never forget. At one of the parties, a girl took a special interest in Marky. Marky wasn't stupid, and though she was very good-looking and seemed to be really nice, she was from around town, and Marky even remembered her from school and some of the parties. He thought she was coming on a bit too strong. Also, he wasn't sure she had been fully vetted by Brian. He resisted her advances, but only after she had talked her way into his bedroom and they had done some kissing. He told her, firmly, that they would have to get to know each other better before they did anything more. That's when the trouble started. She started wailing, then ran straight for a bedroom door and crashed into it, cutting her forehead, which produced copious amounts of blood. She ran screaming through the house in a panic, although not so panicked that she didn't get a few selfies of her injury. Brian got hold of her and made sure she was taken to the hospital. It was the next day that attempted rape allegations were made. Randy and Brian investigated her and found bad news. "Marky," said Randy, "you aren't going to like this. She never finished college and worked as a secretary 150 miles away in a trailer." "Not good," said Marky. "And she has a boyfriend. And her boyfriend's name is Jay Snoozy." "Jay Snoozy," said Marky, leaping to his feet. "She filed a formal complaint against you this morning." "Damn." and we know they were going to file a $10 million lawsuit. Never, said Marky. That's terrorism. Now, Marky, don't get too worked up. I went down to the side porch last night, and I learned that if someone lost a paper bag on that porch, say full of $100,000, interesting things might happen. How do I conjure up $100,000 in cash? The bank will have questions. Come with me. Randy led Marky to his office and opened a wall safe. Inside was at least $1 million in cash. This is where planning ahead comes in. I started making sure there was plenty of cash around 2 years ago. I took this out just $8,000 or $9,000 at a time. Nothing that the IRS's attention. Nothing that would get the IRS's attention. I'll take care of it. In the next few days, Gorgie went on a trip home to Las Vegas. Then he came back. Then Jay Snoozy and his girlfriend managed to OD on heroin. The police informed them about that the charges of assault would be dropped. Heavens me, said Randy. It looks like that girl is dead. Oh no, said Marky. How terrible. The parents tried a civil lawsuit, but that was child's play for Marky's lawyer. Brian, however, was told by Randy that he would have to go. He was the one who was supposed to vet guests, and that kind of oversight was unacceptable. Randy took over his job from then on, and both of them vowed to be more careful about women. Randy started making sure Marky did some charitable giving just to play it safe. He also increased the security around the compound with a full-time team. Gorgie, to their great grief, died just 1 year later. Damn, said Marky. Little people don't live as long a lot of the time, said Randy. Marky had a 50-foot marble column put by the pool. Atop was a 12-foot golden statue of Gorgie. It was placed far enough back that he always seemed to gaze on the people around the pool.